You remember him, the one who never did the homework, who sat in the back and said nothing during lessons, who failed the exam everyone else passed, who the teachers wrote off in the first semester and the students stopped expecting anything from sometime around year 2. The one your parents pointed at, not as an example to follow, but as a warning. Don't end up like that. Apply yourself. Pay attention. Your future depends on what you do in this classroom. You followed the advice. You applied yourself. You passed the exams, got the grades, collected the certificates, followed the prescribed path with discipline and consistency. And then, sometime around your mid-20s, you heard something through the network of people who knew him. He's a millionaire. Not comfortable, not doing okay, not earning good money. A millionaire. At 25, the kid who couldn't pass a geography test. The kid the system wrote off before he was old enough to write himself off. The kid nobody expected anything from, including for a long time himself. And you felt something complicated, something most people won't admit to feeling, not just surprise, something that sits between admiration and irritation and genuine unsettling curiosity. How? That question, how, is what this entire video is about, not the story. The mechanics, what the lazy pupil figured out that the diligent student missed, what the system that failed him accidentally gave him, and what the path from written off to wealthy actually looks like when you examine it without the mythology. Let's go inside it. What the school system accidentally taught him by failing him. Here is the first thing to understand about the kid the system wrote off. The system writing him off was not a neutral event. It was an education, just not the one anyone intended to deliver. When a student is consistently told, through grades, through teacher responses, through institutional signals, that their particular kind of intelligence has no value in this environment, one of two things happens. Either they internalize the assessment and spend years recovering from it, or, and this is rarer and more interesting, they stop seeking validation from the system entirely. The second response is the one that eventually produces the millionaire at 25. Because here is what abandoning the institutional validation track does for a person, unintentionally. It forces them to develop an alternative metric for their own worth. And the alternative metric that self-directed, curious, unconventional minds almost always gravitate toward is practical result. Not grades, results, not assessment, output. The student who excels in school learns, through years of reinforcement, that the correct response to a question is the one that matches the expected answer, that the path to reward is comprehension and reproduction of existing knowledge, that success is defined by an external authority. The student the system dismissed learned something different. He learned, through years of receiving no institutional reward, that external validation was not a reliable signal of personal capability. And in the absence of that signal, he had to find another one. The one he found was, does this work? Not does this satisfy a rubric? Not does this impress a teacher? Does it work? Does it produce a real outcome in the real world that I can measure and verify independently? This is not a small shift. This is the psychological foundation of entrepreneurship, of trading, of every wealth-building activity that operates outside the institutional reward structure. And the lazy pupil who couldn't pass geography had it installed, accidentally, through failure, before he was 17. The gap years nobody posted about here is the part of the story that gets left out when the millionaire at 25 becomes a talking point. The gap between leaving school with nothing and arriving at $1 million was not a highlight reel. It was not a montage. It was not a sequence of clever decisions that worked immediately and built cleanly on each other. It was a period, roughly 18 months to 3 years for most people who travel this path, of genuine confusion, financial stress, social embarrassment, and repeated failure at things that seemed like they should work and didn't. He tried things. Some were naive, some were premature, the right idea executed before the skill base existed to support it. Some simply failed because failure is the primary data source available to someone learning without a formal curriculum. He sold things online before he understood margin. He tried drop shipping before he understood supply chains. He experimented with trading before he understood risk management. He started a service business before he understood how to price, how to close, how to deliver consistently. None of these things worked immediately. Most of them lost money. All of them taught something that no classroom was going to teach: the specific, granular, deeply personal knowledge of what it actually feels like to try and fail in a real market with real consequences, and then analyze the failure honestly enough to do better next time. This period is invisible in the narrative people tell about the unconventional success story. The before photo is always school, the failure, the dismissal, the low expectations. The after photo is always the millionaire. The 3 years of grinding through failures in between don't make it into the story because they're not interesting to the outside observer. But they are the story. They are literally the mechanism. Every failure was a tuition payment into an informal education that was building exactly the skill set the eventual success required. The diligent student who followed the prescribed path was also failing during this period, but their failures were cushioned by the structure of the institution, by the grade that represented a second chance, by the curve that adjusted outcomes. They were protected from the full weight of consequence. He wasn't, and the full weight of consequence, experienced repeatedly and honestly, is the most efficient teacher available to a human being who is paying attention. Every person who builds unconventional wealth has a specific moment, not always dramatic, sometimes almost quiet, where the experimentation period ends and the direction becomes clear. Not clear in the sense of guaranteed. Clear in the sense of, this is the thing. This is where my particular capability meets a real market need and produces a result I can compound. For the kid from the back of the class, this moment arrives when something he tried, after months or years of things that didn't work, produces a result that is disproportionate to the effort he expected it to require. Maybe it's a product that sells faster than he can restock it. Maybe it's a trade that works not just once, but repeatedly, because the logic behind it is sound, and he can articulate why. Maybe it's a service he delivered to one client, that client immediately refers to 3 others without being asked. The specific vehicle matters less than what the moment does to the person who experiences it. It answers the question that school never answered for him. Not can you perform within our system, but can you create value that the real world will pay for independently? And when the answer arrives as a yes, as a concrete, financial, measurable yes, something shifts permanently. The internal narrative changes, not from failure to success, from I don't know if I'm capable of this to I now have evidence that I am. And evidence-based confidence is a categorically different resource than the performance confidence that grades and certificates produce. It is harder to acquire. It is also significantly harder to take away. Because nobody can revise the grade on a result that already happened in the real market. The money either arrived or it didn't. And when it arrives from your decision, your execution, your judgment about what the market needed, that is a data point that compounds psychologically the same way capital compounds financially. He didn't become a millionaire at 25 because he got lucky once. He became a millionaire at 25 because he got that evidence, that first real market-validated evidence, early enough and responded to it aggressively enough to build a compounding system around it before the system followers had finished their 3rd year of university. Let's get into the actual mechanics. Because The Millionaire at 25 is not just a story about unconventional education and self-belief. It is a story about specific financial decisions executed within a specific window of time. The math behind 7 figures at 25 requires one of 3 things, or some combination of them. High-margin business income, consistently reinvested. A business generating $30,000 to $50,000 per month in net profit, not revenue, profit, that is systematically reinvested rather than consumed by lifestyle, compounds to $1 million within 2 to 4 years depending on starting point and growth rate. The key variable is not the revenue, it is the reinvestment rate. The 25-year-old millionaire is almost never the one driving the expensive car at 22. He is the one driving the same car he drove at 19 while his business account grows. The lifestyle inflation that destroys wealth potential arrives later for him, if it arrives at all, because he understood before most people his age that money spent on display is money removed from the compounding engine. Leverage trading with systematic risk management. The Forex, crypto, and options markets offer leverage structures that, applied with documented strategy and disciplined risk management, can produce percentage returns that convert small capital to large capital within timeframes unavailable through traditional investment. The caveat here is not small. The failure rate in leveraged trading is high, catastrophically high for people without a systematic approach. The 25-year-old who built wealth through trading did not do it through bold bets and lucky timing. They did it through the same iterative, failure-informed process described in segment 2, applied specifically to market mechanics until a repeatable edge was documented and compounded. Equity in a fast-growing asset. A business interest, a real estate position acquired with leverage at the right time, a significant stake in a venture that appreciated, equity positions that multiply in value rather than generating linear income can create seven-figure outcomes within compressed timeframes. The common thread across all three mechanisms is not intelligence in the academic sense. It is capital allocation judgment. The ability to identify where a dollar will produce the highest return, deploy it there, and protect it long enough for the compounding to work. And capital allocation judgment, notably, is not taught in school. It is learned through exactly the process the lazy pupil went through: exposure to real markets with real consequences, iterated until the judgment develops. This segment is the most uncomfortable one, and it is the most important one. Because this video is not really about the lazy pupil. It is about what his story reveals about the assumptions the diligent student made and what those assumptions cost. The diligent student, the one who did the homework, passed the exams, got the degree, made a series of reasonable, socially validated bets about how the world works. They bet that demonstrated academic competence translates reliably to financial outcome, that the credential signals capability to the market, that following the prescribed path leads to the prescribed destination. These bets are not irrational. For much of the 20th century, they were accurate. The correlation between educational credential and economic outcome was strong enough that the strategy was sound. But the correlation has been weakening for decades, and in 2026, the distance between academic performance and economic outcome has never been wider. Not because education has no value, but because the market has developed alternative, often more efficient ways to identify and reward capability. The diligent student graduated with debt, with 3 to 5 years of their peak risk-taking years already allocated to an institution, with a credential that signals a specific kind of intelligence to a specific kind of employer, but that does not by itself generate wealth. The lazy pupil graduated with none of that, but also without the psychological conditioning that 4 years of institutional validation installs, without the deeply embedded belief that the path to reward runs through external assessment, without the assumption that someone else's rubric is the appropriate measure of your capability. He had to build his own rubric, and his rubric, does this produce a real result in the real world, turned out to be a more direct route to financial outcome than the one the institution offered. This is not an argument against education. It is an argument for examining what education actually installs, beyond the knowledge and the credential, and whether those installations serve or hinder the specific goal of building wealth in a market economy that increasingly rewards demonstrated output over documented competence. The diligent student is not behind forever. The compounding available to someone with a strong income, a systematic savings rate, and a willingness to deploy capital into growth assets is substantial and real. But the head start the lazy pupil built during the years the diligent student was in the institution, that head start is compounding too. And compound advantages, like compound interest, grow faster than linear ones. Strip away the narrative, strip away the school story and the failure and the unconventional path. Reduce the 25-year-old millionaire to first principles. What are the actual traits, the repeatable, learnable, non-mythological traits that built the number, tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to operate without a clear institutional signal about whether the current path is correct, to make decisions in uncertainty and adjust based on result rather than paralyzed waiting for certainty that never arrives. Result orientation over process orientation, caring primarily about whether something works, not whether it follows the expected procedure. This trait produces efficient learning because it filters out everything irrelevant to the outcome. Asymmetric risk appetite, the willingness to take concentrated, calculated risks with limited downside in exchange for significant upside, not recklessness, calculated asymmetry. The ability to identify situations where the worst case is survivable and the best case is transformational, and act on them deliberately. Compounding instinct, the intuitive understanding that reinvesting output, whether financial return, skill development, reputation, or network, produces non-linear results over time. The 25-year-old millionaire reinvested almost everything in the early years, not because they were told to, because they could feel the math. Indifference to external validation at critical decision points. This is the trait installed by the school experience, by years of receiving no institutional reward, and it is arguably the most valuable one. The ability to make a financial or strategic decision based on your own analysis of the evidence without requiring social permission or institutional endorsement. None of these traits are genetic. None of them require a particular IQ. All of them can be developed deliberately by anyone willing to create the conditions, which primarily means exposure to real stakes, real feedback, and the honest analysis of both. The lazy pupil became a millionaire at 25, not because he was secretly brilliant and the system failed to recognize it, not because he got lucky, not because some hidden advantage gave him access the rest of the class didn't have, because the system's failure to validate him forced him, earlier than almost anyone around him, to develop a different relationship with capability, with risk, with failure, and with the question of what success actually means when nobody external is defining it for you. The lesson is not drop out and hustle. The lesson is not school is useless. The lesson is this. The metric the institution used to evaluate you is one metric. 1. It measures a specific kind of performance in a specific kind of environment under specific conditions. It does not measure your capacity to identify opportunity. It does not measure your tolerance for productive failure. It does not measure your ability to allocate capital, build systems, or create value in a market that doesn't grade on a curve. Those capabilities are built elsewhere, through real stakes, through honest failure, through the long, unglamorous, unposted middle section of every unconventional success story. The back of the classroom was never the problem. The willingness to stay there, never looking for a different room. That was, share this with the person in your life who the system wrote off. They might be further ahead than anyone knows. See you in the next one.